I'm David Petersen, and this is Mouse Guard Creator Commentary for Legends of the Guard Volume 1, The Tale of the Battle of the Hawk's Mouse and the Fox's Mouse. And I'm joined today by the artist and writer of that story, Jeremy Bastian.
Hello.
All right, so Jeremy, where did this legend story come from?
Well, this is my second attempt at a legend story. The first attempt was a much more complicated, almost Mission Impossible kind of thing with multiple characters and like this overall goal of trying to fend off a weasel sort of invader. And it was going to be too complex, too complicated, too almost boring in a way. I decided I wanted to try something a little bit different. I wanted to do something a little bit more epic, more mythological as far as the world of Mouse Guard. And so this sort of stemmed from my brainstorming session after that first attempt.
I have to say, this is one of the ones where, and it happened occasionally with legend stories where, it's a good story. I really like, the legend stories, but occasionally there's one where the idea in it is so good that I go, ooh, I wish that wasn't a legend. Like, I wish that was part of the actual Mouse Guard history and lore. And this one, we'll get into the story as we go, but it deals with kind of the first guard mice and the first matriarch.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with the idea of legends of the guard. I did want to, after that first one, which was going to be a little bit more of like, oh, this was just a tale of guards mice doing a really cool thing. I like the idea of coming up with more of a legend, a legendary kind of a story. And so I had a lot of fun with this. And I think it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. Just some of the dialogue, some of the narration towards the end, even in the beginning, is I look back on it very fondly.
All right, so let's start with page 1. Page 1 has a lot of text on it and is almost more like a children's storybook in some ways, the way it's illustrated than a comic.
Well, that's I also what's so unique about Mouse Guard that I love is the format and then the square format. And I do love children's book illustrators and children's books, and just they have a lot of fun with it. And sometimes I think comic book artists don't take full advantage of what you can really do with certain things, and you'll see that later into this story with the spiral battle scene. But the first page I wanted to have really sort of set apart, almost like something you would come across in a book, a novel. And I thought it really helped set the mood of it.
And you illustrated this using a brush to ink with, correct?
Yes, all of the pages are actual size. Like there's no reduction. I draw all my work to actual size, and it's all done with brush and ink. The lettering is lettered with a crow quill, so that's hand lettered. With this first page, that field. So I was living in a place in Plymouth, Michigan, in the sort of country, and we had this great field outside. And I thought it would make a perfect setting for this story once I finally figured out what the story was going to be. The unfortunate bit was I started this in the winter, and so that field was completely barren. You could see, the pretty much the tree skeletons and bush skeletons and all that stuff, but it still gave me a good basis for what to base the field off of.
And on page 1, we get the setup for the story, that mice used to be servants of their animals, and that there was a hawk and a fox that specifically were at battle with one another. And then on page 2, we start to meet the main characters. So we meet Faulkner.
Yeah, so the main story is about these two mice characters. Faulkner, who works for the hawk, and then Sofano, who works for the fox. And I wanted these two pages to really be reflections of themselves, introducing the two characters. And it's also, I'm a big fan of fighting games, and so this is almost like my title or my character select screen where you've got the two characters like facing off against each other.
And pages 2 and 3 actually face each other, so they're kind of horizontal mirrors of each other in terms of the panel arrangement. Where here panel 1 is the character select mouse. Panel 2 is the larger creature that the mouse works for, and then panel 3 is the mouse interacting with their family, surrounded by a border, and we'll get into that on page 3 as well. But so for Faulkner, this armor design is amazing.
Ah, there you go. Well, I have the benefit of being able to see all your armor designs and trying to come up with something just a little different, but in the same lines. And with these two different cultures, because basically the hawk, like his mice are a little bit different culture than the fox's mice that he sort of controls. And so with the hawk, I wanted a little bit more of a medieval feel, mixed with a little like almost Viking-esque sort of flavor as well. The idea is in panel 2, the Hawk's Throne. All the skulls are little mice skulls, and everybody is like they're really thrilled to be in service to this creature. And so the higher up the skull, the more prestige, the more fame they're accorded in the eye of their master. So at the very top, right where he sort of sits, you can see there's some actual tombs, not just skulls hanging from branches. And those are ex guards mice, hawk guards mice, and that have had the most sort of prestige.
Is there any significance to the white roses and rose petals all around the base of the throne in panel 2?
Well, I like to play around with textures and different things to really sort of create the different layers of the image. So the sticks are the nest and the throne, and then below that I wanted to have all these petals. It's all completely covered in petals because it's all tributary. It's to honor their master and to create that different sort of texture and color sort of range to make the image a little bit more complete.
In panel 3, we've got the introduction of Faulkner's wife, Faroon. And I have a bunch of things to say about this panel because Faroon ends up making it into not just this legend story, but I wove her in as the first matriarch in the Black Axe. And then I have also loved Faulkner, and we'll get to Sofano's design on the next page too, but I've loved their design so much that I have made a book plate of each of them. And I tried to incorporate this border that's in panel 3, this wooden sculpture, decorative border, into my pieces. And then the tapestry that's behind Faulkner and Faroon is also makes an appearance in the Black Axe, in the pages of the Black Axe. So this panel, I mean, this story is pretty important to me, but yeah, I've cribbed a lot. I've stolen a lot from you.
Well, thank you, David. Yeah, I really had a lot of fun playing around with the family life of the characters, and she is a weaver, and so I think it was important that the idea of like weaving things together, and this is how sort of in my story the guard is formed, is by sort of taking different elements and combining them. And in the background, the tapestry is also a little bit of foreshadowing for this story, because that same image sort of plays itself out and is sort of the downfall of the hawk.
She gives him a bright red cloak. Is there any significance to that? Is it the symbol of love because it's a token of the love, or was it just something visually striking?
It was more of a visual striking kind of a thing. I wanted to work in more of a limited palette because pretty much the essence of the stuff I like to do is a little bit more black and white. So it's a lot of cross hatching and a lot of noodling, as a fellow artist once told me. And I like to add in a lot of texture, a lot of lines. And playing around with color is a little different for me. But I like to keep it very sparse because I think once you add full color to something like this, it really takes away from some of the actual artwork.
All right, on to page 3, where we meet the other main character, Silfano. Like I mentioned, this is a mirror panel layout of page 2. But first, that means we see the fox in panel 1.
Yeah, the fox, I wanted to have a little bit more of a caricature of a fox. Just and this is my own playing around with my style and trying to find unique ways to represent things. And Dave is really good at being very truthful to designs, animal designs, and so I wanted my story to stick apart, be apart a little bit differently. So I did a little bit more of a, almost like a cartoon character version.
Yeah. Is there any? His lair is obviously different than what we saw of the Hawks area. Lots of stone carvings, and there's a kind of a frieze underneath him with looks like thistles and mice, and I can't even tell what all.
Yeah, the like pedestal that the fox is on, all the sort of the mice stonework there. I did that old fashioned where I gridded it out and did the whole like sort of declining perspective X pattern so that I can sort of distinguish like how big to make all the little mice frieze basically. And I wanted this sort of realm to be a little bit more like Romanesque and a little bit more of like a classic gladiator. But as you can tell by Stefano's like tunic, it still has like that medieval kind of a feel. But
yeah, this feels more Viking to me.
Yeah,
like where the Faulkner stuff almost feels like in some ways French armor.
Yeah, I can see
and
that.
then Stefano feels more
basically
Norse.
I have a lot of like costume and armor books, and I just like to take little bits from here and there and put them all together. I think that helps create something very unique, and instead of just, copying like, oh, well, this is 18th century Italian armor, and so, well, you can't have that kind of a hat if you're doing 18th century Italian armor.
Right.
So it's all about combining things and piecing together something unique.
All right, so then Silfano. Now we've got interesting names here. We've got Faulkner, which that one I think is kind of obvious that it's, in reference to a falcon.
Mm-hmm.
But what about Silfano and Faroon? And also on this page we meet Cephatus.
I
the son.
Cephatus.
Cephatus, all right. Cephatus. Stefano's son. Where do these names come from?
I just made them up.
Okay, that's cool.
I really don't have anything like, yeah.
I get asked all the time about my names, and sometimes there's good reasons, and sometimes it's like, I just made some stuff up.
Yeah, it's like sounds, just sounds that sound good together without being like really, bizarre and weird.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and so listening to somebody like read a name as opposed to you trying to make it out, sometimes writers can get a little imaginative, and for me I wanted something a little bit more like, it's pretty much the first thing that comes off my mind.
In panel 2 we've got the fighting select screen for Silfano. Let's talk about some details on this armor. He's got this mace, this multi-pivot mace with a fox's paw at the end.
I really like that thing.
And then he's got 2 axes in his belt, and he's got a shield with a spike on it. But on his tunic, there's also these blood teardrops. I assume that's almost like prison tattoos.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, they are kills, significant kills in honor of his lord.
And I assume his cloak is made of fox fur.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the things I specifically wanted in this story, is because Mouse Guard, the cloak is really like, now you're a guard's mice. You have your cloak. And so this is sort of an origin story for not just how the guard was formed, but also their cloaks. And the idea that each, guardian mouse represents their lord or lady with their fur or their feathers. Like, I am the fox's mouse, my cloak is made out of fur. And in the Faulkner page, that image of Faroon sort of trying to give her husband this cloak, and he rejects it, saying, no, I fight for my lord, and that's the only mantle I will be carrying. And so he rejects her at first, but then that gets resolved in the end.
And then panel 3, we actually meet Cephatus. And again, we have this cool border around the 2 characters. And this one's stone. With a mouse with a sword, mouse with an axe, and then 2 super stylized foxes, I assume?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Eagle Eye Mouse Guard readers will also see another case of where I have stolen from this story. or tried my damnedest to make sure that it's actually incorporated as a real Mouse Guard story and not just a legend. In one of the Free Comic Book Day stories that was later collected in Baldwin the Brave and Other Tales, I have a story about Sephatus grown up.
I'm very honored.
As the gatekeeper of the afterlife, as the gatekeeper of Saiyan, and we do get a brief cameo in there of Sophano and Faulkner as well.
And it's just one of the things that makes the story so good, is because there's just so many little elements that you sort of tie together. It's like a giant puzzle, and a lot of fun for people, Easter egg hunters.
All right, so page 4 is, I think, probably one of your most ambitious storytelling pages ever. And I remember, Jeremy and I used to sit across from each other about once a week and draw comic pages, and he would talk about wanting to do different kind of panel layouts, and he kept mentioning a spiral, and it made no sense when he was just talking about it. And then here in this Mouse Guard page, he pulled it off. It's a spiral panel layout.
Oh, thank you. This again is like one of those things that I think I was probably inspired by a children's book, or just the idea of playing around with the format a little bit more. There is a comic strip that ran in the early 20th century, Winsor McKay's Little Nemo in Slumberland, and he had a lot of fun playing around with his panels a lot too. But it's all about just having fun with the story and trying new things. I think this is one of my favorite pages I've ever done, especially in color, because just the red and that sort of cream and the grays. I'm really happy with how this turned out.
Yeah, I think the gray, because this is one of the only places that the gray comes in as a color. Most of the rest of it is either a tan or a brown. I don't think there's a lot of gray in the rest of it. But making both mice, grayscale essentially, and then letting the red of the background kind of become the blood on the battlefield, the intensity of the battle. But this panel layout is counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive because everything that we've been taught as comic book artists, has this Z pattern that you do, all the way down.
You should see the stuff I'm doing right now.
All the way down the page. And here we go all the way to the right, and then immediately drop down to the area that would normally be the last page, the last panel on the page, and then loop back in. And was there anything that you had to worry? Did you worry about it, or you just jumped in?
I just jumped in. Like for me, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I don't know how to read a comic book. It's hard for me to read a comic book," and I look at that as kind of a challenge. It's like, well, if you thought that was hard, try this. But
you're trying to alienate more new readers.
Well, I'm trying to tell people that it's okay to do things differently.
Okay.
Because basically all you have to do to follow the story is to follow the words.
Yeah, the ribbon.
And so you follow the ribbon down, and the ribbon sort of guides you through all the action. And that's one of the things that when I am doing something bizarre with a layout kind of a thing, basically all you have to do is follow the dialogue, and you'll get the full thing.
And not to get too insider baseball here, but I think the linchpin of why this works. Obviously the ribbon with the text leads your eye through the spiral, but the problem is that when you get to the end of a page on a traditional panel layout, you're at the bottom right corner, and then your eye kind of immediately zigs up to, or either you turn the page, or you're at the end of the page, and here you're landing in the center of the page. But I think the thing that solves that is had the center panel been mirrored, so that Faulkner was on the right and Sophano was on the left.
Oh, yeah.
You'd be trapped in the page. Your eye,
right, yeah.
You'd be in this endless spiral. But the motion of Faulkner getting that blow on Sophano, and Sophano being in the red and angling in this diagonal that almost is leading you back up to what would be the top panel on the next page. It's like it's the escape hatch back out of this.
Well, thank you. I can't say I did that intentionally. Um, but
I mean, I'm sure that
I see what you're saying.
I'm sure if you had done it the other way, there'd be just something that, even if you weren't thinking about it,
right,
you,
right. It
you just would have
look
been like,
off.
yeah, it just looks wrong. It looks wrong.
Yeah. One other thing with this page is you can't see it in the printed version, but if you were to actually look at the original, in the shadow of Sofano, I had scrawled in there in the hatching Sephatus. So like as if the final or the thought that comes through the most as he struck this lethal blow is the idea of his son. But you can't see that here. You just have to take my word for it.
Page 5. Lots of panels on this page. So far we've done, the storybook page, 2 3-panel pages, the spiral page, which in some ways is lots of panels, but is also kind of just 2 panels.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 panels, and then here we've got a ton of panels.
Story. You got to tell a story somewhere.
All right. So panel 1, we've got all these other mice looking on. Are there cameos in this top panel?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I kind of thought that there were. I kind of assumed that there's a mouse all the way to the right, bottom right corner. He's got a pipe. I thought that was the mouse who was telling this story in the tavern at Legends.
Nope, I don't think that far ahead.
Okay.
But that's a good idea, and we can just write that in after.
Retcon it in.
Yeah.
Okay. And then panel 2, got Faroon and Septus looking opposite directions. Any thoughts to this border? Was it just I know you're the king of decorative borders or decorative elements. Was there any specific stuff going on with this, or was it just?
Trying to push emotions. I really like pages and things that are symmetrical. It's just easy to the eye for me, unless it's really sort of off kilter kind of thing. So doing this many panels was kind of tricky for me because it was, well, I have to tell the story and how do I do that? And so by doing all these panels helps me through that. But yeah, I just want to try to create like a connection between all the mice. That's why are they fighting for all these different creatures and fighting each other? They're already like a very sort of tormented species, and the idea that they are all connected. Faroon was able to see that through the son of the guy that her husband just sort of struck down.
Yeah, and this panel 3 here, the kind of calling out no. The mouse's head gets. This is the type of layout that I struggle with. It's it's almost like the Drew Struzan. It's a stylized layout where it's not
like
a literal. It's a montage, and it's not a literal montage or a collage of right. faces and characters. It's stylized, and I always feel like when I try to attempt this, it looks like I have a severed mouse head on top of a a ribbon of no.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if it's the coloration. I don't know if it's just the drawing.
It's all in the color
that makes it not look
like if
not look bad.
If I wasn't doing this in color, there'd be a lot more like cross hatching, like shadowy kind of like organic shapes and stuff like that. This I can tell you that this is it's very inspired by that scene in Watership Down where I can't remember the character, but he's talking about how the rabbits are all trapped, and it almost goes into that nightmarish sort of montage kind of thing, and so this sort of sprang from that.
All right, and then in panel 4, we actually get a better look at Faroon's cloak, which kind of looks like it's made of several pieces of fabric that kind of resemble like the petals of a flower.
Yes.
That was intentional?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I, again, stole that. Eagle-eyed Mouse Guard viewers will see that is on the mantle in the matriarch's office in Black Axe when Kellenaw gets back to Lockhaven in Chapter 6. Just stealing left and right. And Faroon here is kind of putting down this edict of, mouse must not kill mouse.
Yeah, I think my favorite part about this second to last panel is that she calls the skulls that are set up into the hawk's nest as tributary, honorary um, sort of rewards or gifts or whatever.
Trophies, yeah.
Trophies, that's it. As apples of evil, and I just like the idea of this tree of death with these skulls hanging down as apples of evil, all to honor this tyrant figure.
And then at the end of the page, we get a little bit of a surprise as to what's coming. And with this being page 5, it means we then have to turn the page to get to page 6, which is where we get the reveal of the hawk coming back.
I really like putting like a little cliffhangery kind of a bit at the end of a page where you have to turn it. And just, that excitement of, oh no, what's going to come next kind of a thing. So it was really fun to be able to draw this hawk like really big, like, David Petersen style. Like, here's the owl and all of its glory and death and terror. And so this was my chance to do something like that. And again, like a lot of the time spent on this page was in the grass and the leaves. But I find it really hard doing something like this without filling in things from corner to corner because it just doesn't look right.
It's hard to fade off backgrounds that way, other than using like color holds.
Yeah, even this corner, the top corner of this first panel with that open sky had me a little cringy. I was like, maybe I should put some clouds up there.
I think it's probably got enough ink on the page there. Those feathers on the chest are
that's
crazy.
It's kind of meditative when you sort of get into the flow of it.
I completely understand. The text going sideways here, was that a stylistic thing to make it so that the hawk speaks a little differently, or was it just to fit in the dialogue without covering up too much of the image?
It's a little bit of both. I like also, being able to hand letter it. You can play around with it a little bit more than if you were using a font. And so I really dug the sort of, like his words are also attacking. Like they're being thrust down upon them.
Yeah.
And it just gives the page something, a unique look to it. I like it a lot.
And we've got that kind of storybook thing going on again where there's a whole panel that's literally just just text.
Yeah, that was definitely wow. I have a lot of text I want to put in here, and how do I do that without covering up a lot of the artwork? And I was like, you know what? Let's just do it this way.
I think because of how dense panel 1 is, it's not a problem.
Right.
It doesn't.
I could have made that panel 1 much smaller to be able to fit all this stuff in it, but then you don't get the grandiose, quality.
Yeah, I think if panel 1 wasn't as detailed, panel 2 just being a text panel might look like a phone it in kind of a moment.
Yeah.
But because of how detailed everything else is on the page, I think that almost it's a breathing room moment. It's giving your eyes a little bit of a break just to read some text, and it doesn't feel like it's out of place.
Thank you.
And then panel 3, by transition, panel 3 has 0 text in it. As Faulkner goes to grab his what would you call it? It's kind of a pike.
Yeah.
Pike trident.
Warhammer.
Not Warhammer though.
Yeah,
something.
Pike.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the fun things is coming up with along with the armors, coming up with unique weapons and just playing around with different shapes and different what is this mouse being asked to do? He's being asked to fight bigger creatures than himself. And so he needs something that has a little bit more reach and a little bit more fierceness. And so he can use it in many different ways. Like the other side of that, pointy pike is a little bit more of a hammer kind of a side. And so he could use that if he needed to. So it's just coming up with different things that for them to, hurt different animals.
And then this very cringy last panel.
It is a book for kids. So
no, but it's that that flinchy thing where you start talking about, if you talk about lice, you start scratching your head.
Oh, right, yeah.
You see the point of that that pike so close to the shiny part of that hawk's eye, and you start cringing and wanting to close your eyelids and touch your eye, like, don't poke me in the eye.
He was trying to. He was on his way to closing his eye, but then he was no more.
And then page 7. At the top, we've got the fox running away.
There's a lot of dialogue on this page. Well, not so much dialogue as narration.
Yeah. But I think it fits within the framework of the vignette style of that, especially that panel 1.
Yeah.
If I am correct, I think that the flowers in front of the fox are foxglove.
They are.
Is that on purpose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No cameos in that one either.
No.
Other than from the previous panel.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It took a really long time to color these. Like, I am not a colorist. I'm not great at color. I did this all digitally using Photoshop to color it digitally. And so, yeah, to go in there and be like, okay, well, I need to use this brown, and then I need a slightly different brown over here, and to just, that was special. This page, though, has some of my favorite lines.
Yeah, like what?
Well, just like, all the lines, like the two that the main characters say, may feather nor fur ever again obscure the virtue of a mouse. And then to don such an honorable cover, I am made into a mouse's mouse. Thus will be the goal of my life. I just, once in a while you'll write something and you're like, damn.
Yeah. Yeah, mouse's mouse.
I came up with that?
Yeah, mouse's mouse is really good.
Yeah.
And then we have the final panel where it's revealed that the idea that Faulkner and Stefano become the first 2 guard mice in history, and that Faroon is the first matriarch.
Again, trying to come up with like a real legendary kind of a story. I was like, why not? Let's go the full 9 yards and make her the first matriarch. And this is actually an origin story of how it all began.
I had worried about nailing down and setting in stone too much of the Guard's history. And I even thought, like, maybe the Guard is so old that I don't know that I ever want to explain its origins or who was the first. And there's a Legends cover from Volume 1, actually, that I had done before. I had to get the covers done before you guys started submitting your stories. But I did a Legends cover where there's a ghost that shows up.
Yeah.
Kind of almost thinking she might be the first of the matriarchs, and a historian is like, no, we only have records going back to the 4th, and that was so and so, and then the ghost gets mad and ghost stabs the historian. But I wanted to.
That's a great cover, by the way.
But I wanted
the
to,
library he created for that.
I wanted to keep it really vague with not explaining this, and for the role playing game, I had to give a little bit of history of the Guard too, and I gave like just enough that I felt like role players could play the game and have an idea of where all this came from, but I didn't want to. Well, I didn't want to nail it down.
It's a lot more fun that way because people can really play around with their imagination and think of like what was it like centuries before the current Guard was around, and then playing around with like the the sort of architectural like glyphs and stuff in Lockhaven and.
Well, so one of the struggles for me of locking it down is I feel like in some ways you've taken away the need for there to be stories told, because you kind of know it, and there's no way that every moment of every one of those matriarchs' lives are important enough to actually tell a story about. But if I keep it vague, there's an infinite number of potential interesting stories that happened in that void. But actually, because of this story, I think this is like, I don't know that I could have come up with a better origin especially for a matriarch and her whole thing about weaving together mice, and that mice must band together, and then the metaphor of the cloak and the weaving and all of that. So not only is that a great first matriarch story, but in some ways it opens up that vagueness again, that open channel for more stories, because if this is true, it's not just, hey, here's the beginning of time for the Guard. There's this prehistory now of all the mice that were servants to other beasts in the past. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a whole other series of books that's, like it could be its own spinoff of the prehistory of the Guard in terms of those kinds of stories. So it opens more doors than it closes.
Well, I mean, if I ever finish my book, I'd be open to collaborating on a pre-mouse guard, like battle royale of guards mice fighting for different creatures.
All right, we've got that recorded and on record. You guys all heard it here.
Also, with this last panel of the two characters and their new outfits, I tried to mimic a little bit of like Dave's armor, like further on into the Mouse Guard series with the sort of dangly armor bits coming from their.
Oh, okay.
their
Gwendolyn
belts.
kind of has some things like that, and Midnight's armor had a little bit of that kind of thing going. I guess I didn't notice the tie-in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you want to read this story or look at it more closely, you can pick it up in Mouse Guard Legends of the Guard Volume 1, which is available from Archaea. Jeremy's book, Cursed Pirate Girl, is also available from Archaea. And if you want to find out more from Jeremy, you can go to his website.
It is jeremybastian.inc, I-N-K.
And you're also on Instagram and Twitter.
Instagram is at Jeremy_Bastian and Twitter is at Jeremy Bastian. You gotta be careful because if you flip flop those, there's other people that on Twitter is Jeremy_Bastian, and so it's a little tricky. But if you just go to jeremybastian.inc, that's got all the links to all of those.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.